We are opening the file today on a topic that is, well, it's profoundly moving and incredibly tragic. When you provided us with this material, it's centered around the brief but brilliant life and the horrific death of the child actor Judith Eva Barsi. She lived for just 10 years, between 1978 and 1988, but in that extremely short span, she amassed a professional resume and achieved a level of financial independence that is truly staggering.
It forces us to confront an unbearable duality. You have the public image of the successful, vivacious talent who is booking major roles consistently. And that's set against the hidden, escalating terror within her own home. The material presents this story not just as a tragedy, but as a severe failure of systems that were, supposedly in place to protect children.
Our objective here is to undertake a really thorough exploration of the sources, to map out her rapid, successful career, to understand the dynamics of the abuse and fear that she and her mother, Maria, lived under, and also to analyze the specific moments when interventions failed, leading up to the double murder-suicide that ended her life. This is sensitive material, and we're approaching it with total respect and empathy for Judith and her mother. We want to understand the facts, but more importantly, understand the context that allowed this to happen.
All right, so to set the baseline facts, Judith Eva Barsi was born on June 6, 1978, in Los Angeles, California. Her death occurred on July 25, 1988. The official cause was homicide committed by her father, Joseph Barsi. And while this devastating personal reality was unfolding, her professional life was just this ongoing series of triumphs, which makes the contrast almost unbearable to process.
And what truly cemented her place in popular memory for millions of people who might not even know her name are the roles that she completed shortly before her death but were released after. It gives her legacy this very specific, painful resonance.
Absolutely, yeah. She is the voice behind two iconic animated characters of the late 1980s. Yeah. Ducky in The Land Before Time, a role known globally for that insistent, cheerful catchphrase, "Yep, yep, yep," and Anne-Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven. These final projects just showcase the caliber of her talent, a talent that, tragically, she never got to see fully celebrated.
Okay, let's turn our attention now to the mechanism of her professional ascent, which was, it was dizzying. Her mother, Maria Barsi, was the driving force behind this early start, ensuring Judith began preparing for acting and modeling when she was only 5 years old. This was a calculated and immediate push into the industry.
And the results were almost immediate.
Yeah.
And overwhelming. The sources document an incredibly intense workload for such a small child. Judith Barsi reportedly appeared in over 70 commercials in just a few short years. Just think about what that requires. Constant auditions, constant set time, memorizing lines for dozens of different products and campaigns. It signifies a child who was not only available for work, but clearly possessed a distinct, marketable charisma that casting directors recognized instantly.
And that sheer volume of commercial work, it serves as a foundational platform. It quickly catapulted her into higher profile roles on television and in film. We can actually trace this progression right across the mid-'80s. For instance, she landed a role playing Kimberly McDonald in the miniseries Fatal Vision very early on.
And then you see her presence become, well, she was everywhere on network television. She was appearing as a guest star on the big hits of the era, which is remarkable for a child who hadn't even finished elementary school. We see her credits roll through shows like Punky Brewster, which demonstrates her ability to handle sitcom humor. And then she's shifting gears entirely to appear in Cheers. The fact that she could seamlessly jump into the demanding, rapid-fire dialogue of a show like Cheers, it just speaks volumes about her innate ability to take direction.
She was also featured in Growing Pains, further cementing her place in that primetime landscape. And then there's the transition to the big screen, securing a role in the 1987 feature film Jaws, The Revenge, moving from the relatively controlled environment of a 3-camera sitcom to complexity and scale of a major studio feature film, even one that got mixed reviews. That's a huge step up for any actor, let alone a 9-year-old. This body of work, accumulated in just 4 years, it paints a picture of exceptional momentum.
That momentum wasn't just critical, it was profoundly financial. And this is where the professional details start to intersect dangerously with the domestic sphere. The sources are very specific about the scale of her financial success. By the time Judith was starting 4th grade, her annual earnings were estimated at $100,000 per year.
Let's just pause there for a moment because that number needs to be contextualized for you. $100,000 in 1988 is a staggering figure, especially when earned by a child. When we adjust for inflation, that is equivalent to approximately $266,000 in today's money in 2024. That means this 10-year-old was the primary breadwinner, bringing in $250,000 a year for her family.
Right. And that level of income secured a significant upgrade in their living situation. The family was able to purchase a three-bedroom house in the West Hills area of Los Angeles. And while this achievement should have represented stability and security, it actually introduced a radical shift in the family power dynamics. And, crucially, it contributed to the father's escalating resentment.
It's also important to remember that her success was tied to specific physical realities, and some of those required medical intervention. The sources detail that Judith was notably short for her age. At 10 years old, she stood only 3 feet 8 inches, or 112 centimeters.
This physical presentation was a double-edged sword professionally. On one hand, it was highly advantageous for casting. Her agent, Ruth Hansen, confirmed that casting directors frequently hired Barsi to play roles intended for children much younger than she actually was. She was often playing 7 or 8 when she was 10. This expanded her potential roles immensely.
But the flip side of that coin was the immense pressure to manage her development. The sources reveal that she began receiving hormone injections at UCLA, specifically aimed at encouraging growth. This detail is so striking because it illustrates the intense level of control and physical management inherent in being a successful child actor. You have a child whose natural development is being medically intervened with, not for health reasons in the traditional sense, but for reasons directly tied to career longevity and continued employability.
It places the mother and the industry in a morally complex position, balancing professional requirement against natural physiological development. It just underscores the immense investment the family, particularly Maria, had made in Judith's career. An investment that paid off handsomely in financial terms, but which, as we are about to explore, began to fuel the darkness in the household.
So we move from the bright lights of the studio to the shadow lurking within the family home. This is where the story shifts entirely, because the sources are quite clear that Judith's professional and financial success acted as a catalyst. It directly exacerbated the volatility of her father, Judith Barsi.
Judith Barsi is described uniformly in the sources as a severe alcoholic. The increase in Judith's income and his subsequent dependence on his 10-year-old daughter for their standard of living, it seemed to feed a destructive jealousy and a need for control. His anger wasn't subtle. It manifested through repeated and explicit threats.
And we're talking about continuous, active statements of violence. He frequently threatened to kill himself, to kill his wife Maria, and to kill his daughter Judith. These were not, drunken ramblings to be dismissed. They were consistent, terrifying pronouncements that set the stage for terror in that home.
And we know Joseph had a documented history of dangerous behavior outside the home that signaled severe instability. The sources confirm he had been arrested 3 times for drunk driving. This pattern of legal trouble, irresponsibility, and severe substance abuse establishes a context for his unpredictable and ultimately fatal behavior.
The sources provide specific, harrowing anecdotes that illustrate the physical and psychological danger Judith and Maria were facing long before the ultimate tragedy. One incident in particular stands out due to its sheer terror and the age of the victim.
That is the reported incident that occurred before Judith was scheduled to leave to film Jaws, The Revenge. Joseph reportedly held a knife to her throat and threatened to kill her if she did not return home after filming. I mean, imagine the psychological imprint of that moment on a 9-year-old child preparing to leave for a professional assignment. It immediately ties her professional success, her ability to leave to earn money, to an existential threat upon her return.
And this obsession with control extended to actively sabotaging Maria's ability to seek help or connection outside the family unit. In an act designed purely for isolation, Joseph reportedly hid a telegram informing Maria of a relative's death in Hungary.
The sources explicitly note his motivation for that. He was attempting to prevent Maria from traveling or potentially leaving the U.S. with Judith. He was systematically cutting her off from any potential external support system that might encourage her escape. And these threats weren't confined to people. He threatened property destruction, specifically threatening to burn down the house.
And this detail of threatening to burn the house is crucial, as it foreshadows the grim methods he would later employ. But the abuse wasn't just psychological terror and threats of arson. Judith herself offered testimony of the physical violence she endured.
Yeah, she shared details with a friend, recounting that her father had thrown pots and pans at her, an incident that was severe enough to result in a nosebleed. These small, painful details provided by Judith herself are the clearest proof that the verbal threats had already crossed the threshold into physical assault. It made the fear she expressed entirely rational. She was describing a constant, volatile reality, and those closest to her were starting to notice the toll. This brings us to the crucial phase of intervention, a phase where multiple opportunities arose for the system to intercede, and where, tragically, every point of failure contributed to the final outcome. The timeline of official reporting begins quite early.
Yes, the first official report to the police happened in December 1986. Maria Barsi reported Yosef's pattern of threats and physical violence directed against her. This was the first time the official system was activated.
The outcome of that initial report is complex, and unfortunately typical of domestic violence cases where physical evidence is often lacking or, intentionally concealed. The police investigated, but they reportedly found no visible physical signs of abuse on Maria at that time.
And what often happens next, driven by fear, intimidation, or perhaps a misguided hope for change, is that the victim chooses to retreat. Maria decided at that point not to press charges against him. This decision, while understandable under duress, effectively stopped the legal process cold.
And following that police interaction, the sources indicate a temporary superficial change in Yosef's behavior. He reportedly stopped drinking alcohol for a period. However, the psychological abuse, the violent threats against Maria and Judith persisted. And this is a critical pattern to recognize. Sobriety does not automatically equate to a cessation of control or violence, especially when the underlying psychological issues of jealousy and control are not addressed.
As the underlying violence continued, the psychological toll on Judith became externally visible. It served as a silent plea for help. The symptoms she exhibited were profound markers of trauma and stress.
She began gaining weight, which clinicians often link to severe chronic stress in children. And more specifically and strikingly, she developed compulsive behaviors. The source material highlights two highly unusual coping mechanisms. She began plucking out her own eyelashes and also compulsively pulling out her cat's whiskers. These are clear, undeniable physical manifestations of extreme emotional and psychological distress. A child attempting to exert control over something, anything, in an environment where she had none.
This visible decline was the final piece of evidence that spurred professional intervention. In May 1988, just 2 months before her death, Judith suffered a severe emotional breakdown in front of her agent, Ruth Hansen. The agent, seeing this level of distress, knew immediately that the situation was critical.
And this prompted Maria to take Judith to a child psychologist. This was a professional assessment, distinct from a police report. The psychologist was able to identify severe physical and emotional abuse based on Judith's testimony and symptoms. Importantly, this professional finding triggered a mandated report. The psychologists fulfilled their legal and ethical requirement by reporting the findings directly to Child Protective Services, or CPS.
And this is the moment where the systemic failure really crystallizes. The CPS investigation was launched with hard professional evidence of abuse, yet the investigation was closed quickly. We have to analyze exactly why this highly critical intervention failed.
The closure hinged entirely on assurances provided by Maria to the caseworker. Maria convinced the caseworker that she was taking definitive steps to separate the family unit. She assured them she intended to begin divorce proceedings against Joseph. And furthermore, she detailed her backup plan. She had recently rented an apartment in Panorama City, which she intended to use as a daytime haven or a safe place to retreat with Judith.
The tragedy here lies in CPS accepting these verbal assurances as sufficient reason to close the case. While it demonstrates Maria's intent to leave, it overlooks the immense ongoing threat and the fragility of a victim's commitment to follow through when facing an armed, unstable abuser. And we have to understand that CPS, while vital, operates under intense legal constraints regarding parental rights. If the threat level is perceived to have dropped, or if the mother asserts she has a plan, they often lack the leverage to intervene further to remove the child or mandate ongoing observation.
Friends and colleagues were fiercely urging Maria to act, to finalize the divorce, to physically move into that Panorama City apartment and escape permanently. But the sources point to a fatal hesitation. Maria, despite knowing the imminent danger, stalled.
And here we come back to that financial entanglement we discussed earlier. Her hesitation stemmed from a profound fear of losing the family home and the belongings they had acquired, assets purchased primarily with Judith's massive earnings.
This is where the analysis has to go deeper than simple domestic violence. It becomes a discussion about asset entrapment. The financial success Judith created, the very thing that offered the means of escape, became the psychological anchor holding Maria in place. She feared starting over without that substantial asset base. In her mind, she was potentially trading her family's long-term financial security for immediate safety, a horrific calculation that no person should have to make.
It's a terrifying twist of fate. The wealth that was meant to elevate them created a golden cage. And Judith, the child, she understood the calculation better than anyone. Months before her murder, she voiced her fear to friends with chilling clarity.
She reportedly told them, "I'm afraid to go home. My daddy is miserable. My daddy is drunk every day, and I know he wants to kill my mother." She articulated the outcome perfectly. The child recognized the lethal risk that the system, and temporarily her mother, failed to fully act upon. This moment of voiced ignored premonition is perhaps the most painful detail in the entire source material.
All of these escalating warning signs and failed interventions came to their brutal, irreversible conclusion in July 1988. We must now turn to the events as reported by law enforcement and contemporary news accounts, focusing strictly on the facts surrounding the tragedy.
The timeline of the tragedy is generally placed between July 25th and July 27th, 1988. It was a neighbor, Eunice Daly, who finally alerted authorities to the crime. She reported hearing a single gunshot around 8:30 in the morning on Wednesday, July 27th, which prompted her to call the police to the West Hills home.
And when authorities arrived, the details were confirmed in reports published the following day. The Los Angeles Times reported on July 28, 1988, that 3 bodies had been found in an apparent murder-suicide, identifying them as Judith Barsi, her mother Maria, and her father Joseph.
Police Lieutenant Warren Knowles provided the grim details of the sequence of events. The investigation determined that Joseph Barsi shot Maria first, while she was in the hallway of their home. He then proceeded to Judith's room and shot her while she was lying in her bed.
The sources report an additional, horrifying detail that connects back to the father's prior threats. After the shootings, Joseph poured a flammable liquid, identified by investigators as presumably gasoline, over the bodies of Maria and Judith. This grim act mirrored the threats he had made previously to burn down the house, demonstrating premeditation and malice aimed not just at killing, but at erasure.
Joseph Barsi's body was subsequently discovered in the garage of the home. His death was ruled as suicide, resulting from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The brutality and finality of the crime extinguished 2 lives full of potential, marking the devastating end of the Barsi family.
Following the investigation, Judith and her mother Maria were laid to rest side by side. They are buried in adjoining plots at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills. The emotional gravity of these final details speaks to the severity of the loss the community and those close to them felt.
And while the physical reality of Judith Barsi's life ended prematurely, her work ensures her legacy persists, particularly within the world of animation. It's an important point of light in an otherwise dark story.
It's the cruel irony that her most enduring, globally recognized work, showcasing her phenomenal talent, was seen by the public only after her death. Both The Land Before Time and All Dogs Go to Heaven were released posthumously.
Don Bluth, the director of both films, provided some of the most insightful commentary on her abilities, describing her as absolutely astonishing. This wasn't just, standard praise. Bluth was a meticulous director, and he noted that Barsi understood verbal direction, even for the most sophisticated situations.
That specific compliment suggests she had an emotional maturity and cognitive grasp far beyond her years. It allowed her to process complex motivations and deliver nuanced performances, even through a microphone in a sound booth. It takes a unique talent for a child to grasp sophisticated emotional direction and translate that into effective voice acting.
Bluth, who understood the industry's need for specific talent, also remarked on the sheer difficulty of finding such capable child actors. He had clearly intended to continue featuring Barsi extensively in his future animation productions. Her death represented a significant loss to his creative team, as she was viewed as a rare and irreplaceable talent who could carry major animated roles.
Her recognition continued well beyond the industry itself. The sources note a powerful demonstration of the lasting impact she had on her audience. The gravestone at Forest Lawn was actually paid for by fan subscription in 2004, 16 years after her passing.
That fact speaks volumes about how deeply her story resonated with the public, particularly those who grew up watching The Land Before Time. It demonstrated a collective desire to ensure she had a permanent, dignified memorial.
And the memorial inscription itself beautifully captures her identity and the nature of her tragedy. It features her famous line, "Yep, yep, yep," tying her back to the joyful energy of Ducky. But it also includes an allusion to the Martina McBride song, "Concrete Angel."
The Concrete Angel reference is a poignant addition, as that song specifically addresses the tragedy of child abuse, memorializing a child whose suffering was hidden and ignored. It ensures that while we remember her talent, we also remember the injustice of her ending.
And when you look back over the entire list of her film and television work accumulated between 1984 and 1988, Guest spots on everything from The Twilight Zone to St. Elsewhere, major film roles, and dozens of commercials. It highlights the almost unbelievable breadth of her career in just 4 active years. It provides a stark measure of how much was achieved and how much more was violently taken away.
If we bring this exploration to a close, 3 major intertwined themes consistently emerge from the source material. First, we have the documented extreme financial success achieved by a very young child, generating $250,000 a year in modern terms, which provided the family with substantial assets, including their home.
Second, we see the profound and deadly conflict that arose directly from that success. The dark jealousy, the alcoholism, and the escalating violent threats from the father, Yosef, who was threatened by his daughter's independence and earnings.
And third, and most critical for reflection, is the complexity of domestic violence intervention. The sources clearly document the systemic failure, the moment when Child Protective Services closed the investigation based on verbal assurances, combined with the victim's own hesitation. Maria's inability to sever ties completely and escape despite having a plan and resources.
That hesitation, motivated by the understandable yet ultimately fatal fear of losing their hard-earned assets, the family home and possessions, was the final point of entrapment. It demonstrates how easily wealth can be weaponized in domestic abuse scenarios.
The irony is crushing. The one asset that should have been the ultimate source of security became the psychological chain binding them to their abuser.
So we want to leave you with one final thought based on this painful material, something for you to consider moving forward. We saw how Judith's 6-figure income secured the family home. How often, in cases of domestic violence where there are significant shared assets, does financial success inadvertently transform into a barrier, preventing victims from escaping? Does the psychological weight of losing that standard of living, the house, the belongings, truly override the immediate need for safety? And how can systems designed to protect victims better account for this insidious form of financial entrapment?
It raises the question of whether possessing something valuable can make you tragically vulnerable.
Thanks for listening.